Cameras, videography, and photography are confusing. There are a lot of misconceptions on how things work, and YouTube can sometimes be a lonely thing to do. Most of the time, it's just me here, all by my lonesome, talking to confusing cameras. So in today's video, we're going to attempt to improve both of those issues by taking a look at clearing up some common misunderstandings in the camera world with the help of some incredibly talented friends from YouTube. My name is Dunna, and if you're new here, welcome, and if this is the kind of thing that you like, consider hitting that subscribe button and the bell so that you can keep up with what I've got going on. All right, let's hop right into things with our first guest, Dr. Chris Nicholas. You might know him from the channel Becky and Chris. He saves lives, he flies helicopters, and right now he's gonna give you the rundown on something that a lot of people are confused about.
Hello Dunna's audience, Chris from the channel Becky and Chris here, and Dunna asked me to weigh in on what I think one of the biggest misconceptions with cameras is, and that is the myth of lens compression. Now I'm gonna start with a question. Do you think that this lens at 600 millimeters would make the background of an image bigger with respect to the subject than a wider angle lens like this 12 millimeter lens? And I would venture to say that it doesn't matter. So traditionally, people have always been taught that a longer or more telephoto lens will increase the size of your background with respect to the subject as compared to a wider lens. I think that's a bit of a myth because it's the distance you are from your subject that actually determines how big the background appears. The only difference is you have to use a longer lens to get the same framing, and therefore people always associate the longer lens with the bigger background elements, but it's really just the fact that you are far away from your subject. I'm going to illustrate this point very quickly and succinctly with a dolly zoom shot here. So as I'm moving backwards, I'm zooming in, and you can see the background gets bigger with respect to the subject. Now, if I move back, the same camera movement, but leave the focal length the same, but I simulate a zoom in by just magnifying or enlarging the image in post, you get that same effect. You get that dolly zoom Alfred Hitchcock effect. So there you go, that's proof that the focal length or the lens actually doesn't have any effect on the size of the background. It's all about perspective and how far away you are from the subject. If you want to dive deeper into this, we actually have a full video on it on our channel, link up here. But in the meantime, back to you, Dunna.
If you want to see an even more detailed explanation of what Chris was just talking about, feel free to head to the description at the end of this video. There's another video link in there that you can go check out. And you might even see yours truly. But in the meantime, let's get on to our next guest and our next topic. When he's not busy editing television shows and documentaries, Mark Holtze is reminding us that newer isn't always better. It's easy to get caught up in the latest and greatest, but his YouTube channel is often an affirmation of just how awesome vintage lenses can be. Tell us about that vintage goodness, Mark.
Thanks, Dunna. Lenses. It's said that lenses are for life, and that they're one of the best investments you can make when it comes to photography. This full-frame 50mm f1.4 lens is 45 years old and can easily be adapted to mirrorless digital cameras for use today. So if lenses are for life, can a 45-year-old vintage lens compete with today's modern lenses? Well, I say yes, they can. It just depends on how you use them. Vintage SLR lenses still have a lot going for them when used in photography. They're fast, inexpensive, built like tanks, and work almost seamlessly with modern cameras. This makes them highly accessible for anybody willing to experiment with them. And they may not have that edge-to-edge sharpness of modern lenses, but what they lack in clinical sharpness, they make up for in character or patina, which is really just a nice way of describing optical imperfections. Embrace imperfection. When properly used, you can exploit the individual charm these lenses offer to get some unique shots. For example, the Helios 44M 58mm f2 is known for its swirly bokeh, which is best used to emphasize portraits with nice bokeh background. This effect leads the eye towards the middle of the image, isolating your subject. It's an effect that's hard to replicate optically with a modern lens. This is just one of many examples, but if you leverage these flaws and turn them into opportunities, you can capture images that really help you stand out from the pack. Using vintage lenses today definitely requires you to alter your perception a bit, but I think there's a lot of value in that. It's not only a cheap alternative to a modern lens, it's a great opportunity to step outside your comfort zone, learn photography fundamentals, and to experiment. And most important though, it's fun, and ultimately that's what's gonna keep you going. Thanks guys.
And once again, I'll link to an awesome video in the description that you can check out if you want more info on this topic. Okay, here's something that we can all agree on. If we want to take photos or videos, we need light. Our next guest is the resident pro and host of Aperture's 4-Minute Film School show on YouTube, as well as an incredible travel doc filmmaker. Valentina Vee is here to shed some light on the situation. Yeah, I'm sticking with it.
Something that a lot of people come up to me and ask me about is what kind of lighting should I buy? And then they don't tell me anything else. And what kind of lighting you should buy really depends on two things. What is your budget and what are you making? If you're just gonna get a 3-pack of these kind of panels, that's fine, but it's probably not gonna be the best in every single one of your situations. Why? This is a multi-source light. As you can see, there are 672 lights here, which means that this light is only ever going to be soft. You cannot create hard shadows, you cannot imitate sunlight, you can't do a lot of things with this light that you can with a light like this. This is the Aperture 300D2. It is a single source light, which means it has one giant diode instead of 672 small ones. So with something like this, you're gonna be really able to not only get the harshest light you can, but also the softest light if you add different types of modifiers like soft boxes. So when you're considering what type of lights to buy, again, are you only ever going to need to light soft things or large spaces, or do you want to invest in something that's going to give you a little bit more flexibility and is going to give you more creativity down the line? That's it. That's all I have to say. I don't have anything else to say.
That is super awesome advice to a really common question. You need to know stuff like that when you're looking to pick up lights for your projects. Now, before I get to my point, we have one more guest that's gonna blast through some misconceptions of sensor size. Everyone's favorite YouTube camera nerd, Gerald Undone. He's crazy.
Despite the number of videos I've made on the subject, I'd say the impact of sensor size is a topic I still see drenched in misconceptions. The most common one is that larger sensors have a shallower depth of field. And when it comes to depth of field, the only role sensor size plays is determining how far you're standing from your subject and what lens you're using. Focal length and subject distance are the determining factors, not sensor size. However, if you use a smaller sensor, you'll likely be using a lens with a shorter focal length compared to composing that same shot on full frame. For example, you might be using a 16mm lens on Sony APS-C compared to a 24mm lens on full frame to achieve the same look. This 16mm lens will produce a deeper depth of field, not because of sensor size, but because of the diameter of the entrance pupil. I have a whole video on that if you want to learn more, but the simplified version is that a 16mm lens, when using the same aperture, will have a smaller front hole for light to get in, which focuses the rays more closely together and increases your depth of field. Sensor size is irrelevant. Shorter lenses always have a deeper depth of field when everything else is the same. And the same is true for subject distance. If you were using the same lens on both cameras, you'd have to stand farther away on the crop sensor to achieve the same framing, and being farther away from your subject will always increase your depth of field. The only way to compensate for this is to use a wider aperture on your shorter lens. In our 16mm example, we'd need to be at f2 to match the entrance pupil size of the 24mm full frame lens at f2.8. Now the rays will be coming in similarly, assuming you're standing the same distance away, and your depth of field will be similar. Of course, shooting at f2 will appear brighter than the f2.8 exposure, which is the perfect time to drop your ISO to match, because smaller sensors do generally produce more noise than full frame at similar ISO settings, so you should reduce your ISO by your crop factor squared to complete the equivalency and make your images match. In the case of the 1.5 times APS-C crop, this is similar to about 1 stop, so ISO 800 at f2 on APS-C will be quite similar to ISO 1600 at f2.8 on full frame. However, this leads to another misconception, which is that somehow these rules don't apply when putting a lens designed for smaller sensors on a matching camera, i.e. a crop lens on a crop body, but they still do apply, and I'll pass this back to Donna to tell you more about that, since he's shot a ton using lenses specifically designed for APS-C.
Oh yeah, the old focal length misconception is strong when it comes to lenses built for different sensor sizes. So let's break it down. This is a 16mm lens made for full frame camera bodies. And this is a 16mm lens made for APS-C camera bodies. Now, if I take a photo with each of these lenses on cameras with the intended sensor size, the full frame lens looks like this, and the crop lens looks like this. And just for clarification, the camera was the exact same distance from the subject in each photo. As you can see, the APS-C crop photo is more zoomed in. It has a narrower angle of view. The thing that trips people up about this is that if they have the same name, 16mm, how come they don't look the same, considering one lens was designed specifically for crop bodies? Why do we have to do math? And I definitely understand the confusion because we're used to thinking of how wide a lens is based on that number, the 16mm. What's happening here is we're confusing our focal length of 16mm with our angle of view, which is the true measurement of how wide our photo or video will be. Those things are definitely connected, but not the same. The focal length is a physical measurement of the distance between the lens's optical center and the sensor of the camera when that lens is focused to infinity. I know that sounds very complicated, but just remember this. It is literally measuring a part of the lens. As that measurement gets longer, let's say we go from 16mm to 35mm, the angle of view gets narrower, which we would think of as zooming in. Basically, you're seeing a narrower slice of the scene or a narrower angle of view. So the reason that a 16mm lens made for crop sensors is still called a 16mm even though the photo looks more zoomed in is because physically inside the lens that measurement is still 16mm. It's a different angle of view, but it's still the same focal length. This is why we take crop factor into account when buying lenses for crop cameras. In that case, you may hear terms like full frame equivalent. That's because a 16mm lens on crop cameras has a similar angle of view as a 24mm lens on a full frame camera. If I keep going on this, I'll start feeling like I'm talking in circles, but if I haven't made myself clear enough, always feel free to hit me up in the comments and I'll do my best to help you understand. I want to say a huge thank you to Chris, Mark, Valentina, and Gerald for helping me out with this collab. I highly recommend going and following them all. I'll leave links to all of their channels in the description. I sincerely hope that you feel slightly more enlightened than you were coming into this video. If so, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.